Before we get into the video, please consider subscribing, liking, and clicking the Discord link down below. Lots of cool stuff going on down there as we basically talk about nerd stuff and whatever else. That said, enjoy! What's up everyone, Gojin the Makai Phantom approaching ya. If you grew up in the United States and have a slight idea what Tokusatsu is, there's a good chance you associate it with a younger crowd. This I always found interesting for how misleading the statement actually is, as when you look up the definition of the term Tokusatsu, it basically translates to special effects drama, as in pretty much any live-action property with a focus on special effects fall under that category, while others more debatable with their subtle use of them. But to dive into this misconception, we're gonna have to talk about how this technique all began and what started the idea of Tokusatsu being a children's medium. Let's find out. Well, obviously, Godzilla isn't the first special effects movie, even in its home country. But it is the first in Japan to put a big focus on them and evolving it into what it is now, thus coining the term Tokusatsu. Now many would go, but Gojin, in the late Showa films, kids were what kept the king of the monsters alive. That was for a certain time, but it was only temporary, which is why the Heisei era went back to form even on the less darker entries. Of course, Godzilla still has a massive young appeal, hence why Toho and other companies throw their young audiences a bone once in a while, even today. But Godzilla still remains a series that primarily targets the mature demographic. It's just kid-appropriate, as Toho knows children like giant monster carnage and will buy toys and the film tickets. But in spite of the reputation in the West, the movies actually don't have a ton of action going on, and put quite an emphasis on the message around them with a heavy use of dialogue children tend to find boring. In recent years, it's been more that way than ever thanks to the success of Shin Godzilla, where I'd argue we're probably in the least appealing era for children outside of the MonsterVerse, which had the first movie geared towards kids since 1975. Of course, Godzilla's massive appeal ended up spawning multiple rip-offs, movies inspired by it that went more than just its home country, many being by those from the original circle. Eventually, with experimentation, it would expand further with the technique into the superhero genre. Technically, the first was Moonlight Mask, but it didn't really do much to separate it from the American comic hero. Ultraman's case was interesting, as Eiji wanted to do his own thing with the Ultra series and realize what was popular with kids overseas, superheroes. So he invented two in one show, the Henshin genre and the so-called Kyodai hero. This would be such a hit, Ultraman would not only become the vast majority of the Ultra series and spawn numerous clones. After it, Toei would take the formula and make it a tad closer to the comic hero by removing the kaiju aspect to focus solely on the hero stuff, with 1971's Kamen Rider by Shotaro Ishinomori. The thing about stuff relating to that, Ultraman, or even Super Sentai, is they're technically not really targeting a separate age group than, say, Marvel or DC. Both are primarily aimed at a younger crowd, but still throw in a lot of aspects for the adults watching. Only reason one's more stigmatized here is, first off, the existence of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. That series took a show like Super Sentai, a television series from the early 90s with a bunch of special effects per episode with a fair share of intentionally goofy villains, but combined that with bad dubbing and annoying Saved by the Bell character interactions in replacement to the shonen-type comedy and actual investing drama that often goes deeper than what a child would grasp. And that's not even getting into the pervy and darker aspects we had to cut down for the American versions. The kicker here is while American media, primarily aiming for children, still adds in stuff for the adults, we are much more limited, particularly on television where we air them on kids channels, unless you talk about Nick at Night. Japan, due to their different standards, they're allowed to add in quite a bit more for the mature audiences, even going further than theatrical works such as the MCU. It's also worth taking into account TV Asahi and things like it are not the equivalent to America's Nickelodeon, Fox Kids, or Disney. These are just channels that play TV shows, but in the morning have something called Superhero Time, mostly for the younger viewers, but not solely. This might play into the less strict policies since they're not channels made specifically for kids. Of course, there is a whole spectrum of age groups out there. For example, you got Kamen Rider Super Sentai basically being on the age group of Marvel or Star Wars. Then you got Pixar and Studio Ghibli primarily aiming for an even younger crowd, keeping things as inoffensive as can be, but still leaving appeal for adults. Then you got Doc McStuffins, which is for such a young crowd. Adults or older children aren't even considered, since what appeals to someone that young is so drastically different than anybody over the intended age. Not only will the stuff for infants turn off the older viewers, adding anything mildly mature could fuck up the entire formula. Honestly, how this works generally boils down to this. In Kamen Rider Gaim's case, they had to think of how to fit the toys in the plot, what aesthetic should they use for the writers, and how to make something like a fucking orange cool to encourage kids to eat them. But putting Urobuchi behind the script, he knew how to justify it. For the adults, the fruit aesthetic sounds fucking stupid on a surface level, but what Urobuchi did was add all this deep biblical lore behind it to get everyone else on the edge of their seats trying to figure it out, and having the orange look actually making sense. Treading into some quite dark places such as greed, betrayal, and adding things like a love story and complex motivations that'll fly over a kid's head. Kids will enjoy what's being presented to them on a surface level, like a teenager scrolling on their phones through social media. But those old enough to appreciate more will get it. I'm not gonna go too deep on the toy commercial topic since Marco Satsu already made a pretty good video diving into that. Link is in the description down below. But outside of good writing making them work in the context of the story, there is 15 plus collectibles of these guys. They too have an importance in funding the series. Hell, even the adult entry Black Sun used a toy belt throughout the show that was made for the adults. Marvel also benefits from selling toys. Being Iron Man was only the first in the Marvel Cinematic Universe because they asked a group of kids which hero would they like to have as a toy. Again, adult collectibles have some help too, but not to the extent of the Hasbro stuff. Why do you think there's basically an entire new character to the universe on a yearly basis? Because that means they can make more action figures and get people buying them. Obviously, the ticket sales have a big part, but it's not the only reason, or else they'd be more focused on making sequels to the established characters over ones nobody even heard of. Now, I'm aware one is more in your face about it than the other, but that's for the following reasons. First being, one is mostly a TV show that uses suits and heavy use of gadgets that can fit in the narrative. The other is a big budget CGI fest on the big screen. This isn't even tackling the fact a detail like that could screw with the general audience. Even films aimed at an older crowd like Godzilla 2000 or Gojira took some tweaks to make it more accepted upon Western audiences. In Japan, however, it's not exactly distracting looking at the very positive feedback those series contain in their respective countries. But that's because when done right, an intelligent writer can make just about any concept work. This is why Toei and Subodaya Productions occasionally will throw a bone for the mature fans like Shin Kamen Rider Prologue, Amazons, Black Sun, Akibar Ranger, Ultra 7, and Ultraman Nexus. Marvel and DC does this as well. But that's what it means to capture a big fan base. Knowing what your main is, but acknowledging the fact it extends further from that. Having far more than enough to create a successful entry for them alone. This is why people surprised by the fact the new Daredevil series is targeting children's just dumb. Because Disney is going for the prime demographic Marvel been going for since the beginning. Truth be told, for this type of media, I think the term family-oriented is a more appropriate word to use, as though kids are predominantly what's in mind, the term kids movie or kids show is so ambiguous it can mean a multitude of things, while family-oriented is known to be more inclusive. Hell, Subodaya Productions even carry a kids category for Ultraman, being these little chibi anime shows, so clearly they separate the two as well. For me, a true children's program is the opposite of an adult film. As they're generally so inoffensive, they have a very specific group in mind and can't be mistaken for anything else. Yeah, you could label Godo, a fair share of Godzilla movies, Friday the 13th, or Parasite adult entertainment, but what usually comes to mind is porn. Look up kids anime and see what comes up. Most of the results are the really young stuff, despite quite a big chunk of shonen anime still falling under that category, such as Fullmetal Alchemist, Dragon Ball, My Hero Academia, Demon Slayer, or even Sailor Moon, which is obvious since that was made as the magical girl equivalent to Super Sentai. One thing these weebs won't acknowledge is once you look up shonen in Japanese, the prime demographic is from ages 6 to 14 years old. Young teens are as high as the demographic goes. Anime fans tend to hear that teen part and think it's the entirety of Shonen Jump. No, the teen stuff are rom-coms like Toradora, crime thrillers such as Death Note, or explicit erotic comedies like Toda of Nu. Battle shonen are almost always targeting elementary school plus, unless you're talking about the more gruesome ones or stories more grounded in reality with their tone and art style. Let's compare these to more respected shonen anime.
どうせまた喧嘩だろ。どうしていつもお前は。話せこのクソじじい。さっき。あった。ありえへん。何が。
あんたが子持ちだったとはね。
そんなことあるか。
ニーナ、ちょっと痛いかもしれないけど我慢な。
兄さん、再練成するつもり？そんなこと僕たちは。
私のキメラは完璧に練成されている。誰にも元に戻せんよ。気をつけろよ。母親みたいにしないようにな。
いやー、実に難しいオペだ。
一皮むけたじゃねえか。
ありがとうございます。
そこまでむけろとは言ってね。
すみません。バイタ。よし、いいこと思いついた。キラ。やったー。ワン、ツー、丸、見え。
Before moving on, I got two more points to make. And the first is, since Shotaro Ishinomori wrote manga too, when he'd create these shows, Ishinomori would also make an alternative version for Shonen Jump that TV restrictions wouldn't allow, but his target demographic was still the exact same. And don't even get me started on how some of these so-called teen anime got localizations by 4Kids and Saban Entertainment. Almost like two Japanese kid-friendly series that get memed for that. But all I'll say is, it's kinda retarded to assume every single entry in a magazine called Shonen Jump is for teenagers. Hell, some are even aired early in the morning. But at this point, I haven't really gone into how Tokusatsu has been outside of the appropriate viewing for children, with the exceptions of shows like Godo, Amazon's Kamen Rider, and things like it, but we're about to go into that. Reason I go into these is the style of a lot of these splatter films can be argued to have spawned from the style of Toku hero shows, even if they aren't exactly the same genre. But that's mainly because both are action, and these shows had quite an impact how their special effects themed action movies do their format, with the monsters having a humanoid design and similar use of martial arts. But it's not even just action movies, the horror genre has taken elements from it too, with Daiei's Yokai Monster trilogy. There's some horror that do fall closer to what we think when we hear the word Toku, as we already discussed Godo, and there's the Yokai Monster series that's more similar to other J-horror at the time like Onibaba. But the style of effects look closer to that of Kamen Rider. Since I brought up that trilogy, I think this should be addressed. I know Spook Warfare was on the kid-friendly side, but that was pretty much a superhero film that left after with Ghost. Similar to the Daimajin trilogy, they all came out around the same time because the crew wanted to approach a similar topic for each but done differently rather than being one connecting narrative. The recent films by Takashi Miike are only kid-friendly since the last one was a literal remake of Spook Warfare, with the newest being a sequel to that. Basically, what I'm trying to get across is 2 points. One, it's dumb to assume an entire country's special effects media is going for a younger crowd simply because a genre like superhero is generally going for what it always has, 2. And for the media that is primarily aimed at kids, who the hell cares? Why does something have to primarily have you in mind to enjoy it? That's just straight up insecurity. These shows know they got a big adult crowd, and not only add multiple elements for them specifically in their main shows, but they straight up make entries only for them as a thank you, and even create original works like Garo that began for adults and will remain for adults due to the nature of it. But it exists because adults like that type of entertainment. It's the same reason we got Spawn in the United States. Enjoy Star Wars, enjoy Marvel, enjoy Kamen Rider, enjoy Ultraman, enjoy Shonen Jump, because life's too short to limit yourself over what some insecure boomer might say. But that said, what I went into today doesn't even scrape the surface of what the Western audience doesn't associate with the term, despite the fact they do count. Ju-on, those are Toku. House, you bet your ass that's Toku. The Audition, that could be argued as a Toku property as well. Hell, even those terrible torture porn films fall under that category just because they've got a focus on special effects. Fucking war movies are considered tokusatsu as well, because Eagle of the Pacific, I guess you can say, walked so Gojira can run.
But that said, I just felt like giving my piece on this whole topic since I felt like if I didn't, nobody else was going to. Though maybe I'm wrong since Manga Kamen did beat me to a video explaining why Kamen Rider's been doing better than Marvel, so hey, at least if someone else does do it, I did it first! Please comment your thoughts down below, and if you enjoyed it, smash that like button, share it around, and subscribe. Make sure to hit that bell for notifications to keep up to date on all my future content, and also check out my social media accounts and alt tech. Links are in the description down below. This is Gojin the Makai Phantom. Leaving the building.